Chapter 9. Brody was restless. Tasha had slept all day and now into the early evening, sleeping deeply. She hadn't even stirred when the security guard from downstairs had indeed come to check on her. Brody had invited the guard in and even encouraged him to peek into the bedroom, which he had done. And since it was obvious Brody had made himself comfortable in the living room, a sports event on TV, and the scent of coffee apparent, the fixings for a sandwich out on the kitchen counter, the guard had relaxed and had left the condo, reassured that Tasha was in no danger. Not something Brody agreed with, except that she was in no danger from him. After what had happened at the coffee shop, he wasn't sure of much else. The connection he apparently had with Tasha after she had looked into his mind and caught him completely off guard. Over the years, he had been, quote-unquote, read or scanned by many psychics he was aware of, and quite possibly a few he'd had no awareness of. Like most non-psychics, his mind normally provided only minimal shielding against the psychic's probing, and he'd only ever been able to actually feel the most powerful psychics when they scanned him. But today, that had been different. At first, no, the same. Not really sensing a presence in his mind, even though he had known she was there. But then, something had changed. His own memories had begun to surface without his volition, passing before his mind's eye in scenes that moved faster and faster until they were only a blur. Even more, he had begun to feel Tasha's presence, feel her absorbing not only the memories, but his emotions as well. Hell, he'd almost been able to see her in his mind, not flinching even though some of his darker emotions had struck her like actual physical blows. She felt what he had felt, all he had felt. That had been a strange, unsettling sensation, and his instinct had been to draw back, to preserve something of himself, retain some sense of personal privacy. But then something else happened, something he couldn't explain even to himself. Tasha had gone deeper into his mind, below thought, vanishing into some dark place Brody hadn't recognized as being part of himself. Really didn't want to recognize if it was part of himself, and if it wasn't, then what was it? Where was it? All he knew was that the experience was a confusing jumble after that, something about a dark, chilly maze, and Tasha being trapped there. A few psychics have reported that when they dropped their shields and read one of our guardians initially, they were pulled deeper, seemingly by a third party, into some kind of dark maze. That's the first I've heard of it. Well, it's never happened with you before, right? So there was no reason for you to know, especially since we don't know what it means. The few psychics reporting that said it wasn't really a big maze, but a dark one, and that they felt compelled to follow a voice urging them toward the center of the maze. Was that the maze Murphy had spoken of, a maze to test the psychics Duran was interested in? Inside his mind, and yet not, Tasha drawn deeper and deeper until he could no longer see her. Another presence shadowing her, challenging her somehow. He had felt more than seen Tasha weakening, because she'd been in that dark place where he couldn't see her, and yet he had somehow felt what was happening to her, and instinctively reached out to help her. When his fingers had wrapped around her wrists, he had been conscious of the strangest feeling. He couldn't really describe it even to himself, except he was connected. They were connected, somehow a part of each other, and closer than he had ever been to another human being in his life, closer than he had been even to Elizabeth. He found you, Tasha said. Yes, I knew better than to make a scene, but I asked how he had found me. He seemed to take great pleasure in telling me that the student I had been slightly wary of was, in fact, one of theirs. They were everywhere, he said. Sooner or later, one of them had been bound to find me, so he had waited. And he thanked me, because I had, through that agent of theirs, given them a very valuable psychic. The young, powerful girl, Tasha said slowly. Yes, He said they had her. Jesus. It made me feel sick and helpless, because he kept talking to me as if what he told me didn't even matter, and what he was telling me then was terrifying. He was so calm, so matter-of-fact, and sure of himself as he laid out my future. Quietly, reasonably, implacably. Now that they had found me again, I wouldn't be allowed to go free. My path was with him, and I had to accept that. I was intended for him, he said. We were a genetic match. I could not escape my destiny. John didn't matter, my marriage didn't matter. I was intended for Elliot. He was psychic. I couldn't hide from him my revulsion or my soul-deep determination to do whatever was necessary to escape that fate, even if it meant taking my incredible story public and making sure I could convince everyone it was true. That was in my mind. That was what he saw. That was the threat. Feeling a bit queasy herself, Tasha said slowly, I don't think I like where this is going. Elizabeth sighed. If I had only guessed, but I didn't. Even after what I had felt in Elliot, I didn't know how far they would go to make sure their secrets weren't revealed. Elliot got up and walked away. I should have remained where I was and waited for John. I should have stayed around people because that offered me some protection, a truth you figured out for yourself. But I was frightened. I set out walking, taking a familiar shortcut across a park, meaning to meet John. Instead, I once again met Elliot, but this time he had a gun. Tasha couldn't say a word. She just lay there on her bed, on her side, and listened to the dark, lovely woman Brody had loved. I don't remember the shot, Elizabeth said, almost conversationally, not even the sound of it. I remember a blow to my chest that knocked me backward, and it was dark for a time, very dark. Then I heard John's voice calling me, and for a moment I could open my eyes. For a moment I could see his face. Just for a moment. Tasha was silent for several heartbeats, then said slowly, I guess the rest is obvious. I guess it is. My name is Elizabeth Lyon Brody, and on the 12th day of September 10 years ago, I died. And Brody became a man with a mission. Yes, protecting people like you, saving people like you, because he couldn't save me. Duran didn't follow Murphy when she left him, though he did change his own location, taking the usual precautions. The meeting had given him much food for thought, and though he had not, he trusted, revealed much to Murphy, he had been left feeling more than a little grim. Brody had always been a worthy opponent, and if Duran had privately considered them more equal than many in either his or Brody's organization, he had told himself it was simply because theirs really was a level playing field. Between the two of them, it would always come down to a battle of wits, intelligence, strength, and strategy, and, of course, sheer determination. But if Brody could tap into a psychic's abilities, especially this psychic's, Tasha Solomon's, that changed things. That changed important things. And even more so if Bishop had indeed become aware, perhaps even involved, because he could cause them a great deal of trouble without having to do very much at all, positioned as he was inside the FBI. Even the possibility caused Duran to rethink what he needed to accomplish at this particular meeting. He had chosen as this meeting place somewhere a lot more open than a bar, and honestly he wasn't sure if it was his dignity he mocked or that of the men he was meeting. He was sitting on a park bench beneath a lamppost, illuminating the walking path, casually smoking a cigarette. He felt more than heard the quiet engine of a very expensive car get as close to the path and the bench as was possible, heard a car door open and close with quite excessive noise, like the footsteps approaching him, too quick and nervous. Some people just couldn't be quiet about things, and that could be dangerous to more than just their own lives. Jesus, Duran, sit down. After an instant's hesitation, the other man sat. I didn't know you smoked, he said. I don't, Duran said calmly, but there are so few acceptable places to smoke nowadays that someone smoking on a park bench at night never causes a second thought in anyone's mind. You're always aware of what people might think, aren't you, Duran? I'm still alive, aren't I? That silenced the other man, but only for the space of a few heartbeats. When he finally spoke, it was measured rather than hasty or disrespectful. I had to slip away from the party. I can't stay long or I'll be missed. Since it's a fundraiser for your campaign, I imagine so. The speeches are over and so is dinner, so it's music and half-drunken dancing and a lot of political arguments. Still, I should get back there as soon as I can. Generous donors, a very wealthy political hostess here in Charleston wants to hold another on Friday with, she tells me, a whole new crop of very rich people eager to back my campaign. Duran took a draw from the cigarette and blew the smoke out slowly. That might not be such a good idea. Campaigns cost money, Duran, a hell of a lot of money, you know that. And I can't use any of your funding sources, not without a risk we've both agreed is too great. I have to go the normal, typical political route, the squeaky clean version. Fundraisers and shaking a lot of hands and making a lot of speeches and staying miles away from any scandal. No backroom deals, no lobbyists, no dirty money, not a cent. You can spend money on your end, but it can't be traced to me in any way. Not now, and not years from now. That was the plan. Has anything happened to change that plan? The one you and your boss have spent decades working toward? A tinge of mockery had crept into that polished, trained voice. Duran took a final draw on his cigarette, then leaned forward to drop the butt onto the ground and crush it with his shoe. Pleasantly, he said, it might be worth your while to remember that you aren't the only possible candidate we have. It's our habit to have backup plans for our backup plans. So there are others standing in the wings, ready to activate their own political ambitions, even a few who already have. Starting over at this point would not be so difficult, and we're patient. We're very, very patient. He straightened and turned his head to look at the other man. You have no idea. You have, in fact, recently become something of a complication. One I haven't yet decided how best to deal with. In the meantime, if I were you, I wouldn't value myself so highly that I forgot what my part was in that very careful plan. There have always been kingmakers. Think of it that way. It's kinder to yourself than realizing you're only a puppet. The other man stiffened but nodded. Yes, I know. Good, then we understand each other. Yes, he drew a breath and let it out. You don't ask for meetings for no reason, especially when I'm working. What is it I need to know? Duran considered as if making up his mind, then said, the planned fundraiser for Friday. Yes. If possible, push it back a few days to the following week, and it would be best if you found a reason not to be in Charleston while your hostess gets ready for your grand fundraiser. Not be here, but he caught himself. Certainly. The campaign has been hectic for weeks now. No one would be very surprised if I flew back home to decompress. Leave first thing in the morning. Duran frowned. We'll plan a few brief and seemingly casual campaign stops coming and going. We wouldn't want anyone to think your campaign was running out of steam. That makes sense. Anything else? Duran rose to his feet and looked at the other man as he followed suit. Yes. Have your stylist pick all your ties from now on and don't argue with her. The one you wore night before last looked ridiculously garish on the news clip. It was almost difficult to take you seriously. Right, no problem. You'll also be meeting a few more prospective wives, but make certain nothing goes too far. We want the media interested in your love life, but we don't want them hearing wedding bells just yet. I understand. The women, of course, understand their roles. I assumed as much. Good, then you won't make the mistake of taking their smiles and admiration at face value. No, I won't. Enjoy the rest of your event." Recognizing a dismissal, the man merely nodded, turned, and walked back to his car. Durant stood where he was, watching the car move away, and then, half under his breath, he muttered, "Maybe not such a problem, Brody. Unless there's someone on your side now capable of discovering a truth you can never know, or unless your connection with Tasha Solomon turns out to be something very unexpected indeed, or both." When Tasha opened her eyes, she was half convinced the conversation with Elizabeth Brody had been nothing more than a dream, conjured from a vivid imagination and exhaustion. Except that she knew better. Even though the room was empty of anyone but herself, even though no lovely dark-haired woman sat in a chair looking at her with soul-deep sadness in her eyes, she pulled herself from bed feeling oddly stiff, probably because she had lain in virtually the same position for too many hours. She found herself very conscious of the low sound of the TV in her living room and of Brody's presence. He hadn't left her alone. Tasha gathered up some clothing and then went into her bathroom, closing the door quietly behind her. She took a long, hot shower, more to ease her stiffness and really wake up than anything else. She thought about the information she had been given, a little surprised that she remembered every detail, and yet not surprised at all. It all seemed so incredible, so unbelievable, except that she was right in the middle of it. She got out and dried off, wiping the fog mirror that this time had no chilling message written on it, thank God. Just her reflection, still and quiet, not so weary as it had been lately, but different. Tasha wasn't sure how and felt too unnerved to probe. She dried her hair without really looking into the mirror again, then got dressed in a pair of comfortable stretch jeans and an oversized jersey pullover. Dorm socks with kittens on them completed the look. She wasn't going for fashionable or sexy. She wanted casual and warm, and possibly to hide just a bit. Brody looked her up and down when she came out of the bedroom, but didn't comment on her choice of clothing. He gave the appearance of being relaxed, jacket off, cuffs rolled back. He was not relaxed. "I know you'll probably say you're not hungry," he said by way of a greeting, "but you slept hours and you need to eat, so I found the menu for what looks like one of your favorite takeout places and ordered Chinese. They seem to know what you usually order, so that's what I ordered for you. Is that okay?" "It's fine. Did you call down to the desk?" "I thought maybe you should. The guard seemed reassured hours ago, but it never hurts to reinforce that." Tasha merely nodded, then went to the LCD screen/intercom by the door, an intercom that was also two-way video when the right button was pushed, and called downstairs, cheerfully telling the security guard on duty that they were expecting a delivery from her favorite Chinese restaurant. She pushed the right button so he could see her smiling face. "Got it, Miss Solomon. You seem much better." "Sleep. I highly recommend it. Now, I highly recommend food. I'm starving." She kept her voice light and casual. "I'll buzz you when we're on the way up with the food, Miss Solomon." "Thanks, Stuart." She released the button and frowned a little at Brody as she turned from the door. "He's either working late or pulling a double shift." "Is that usual?" "Well, I wouldn't call it usual, but it happens now and then. Security runs for 4 6-hour shifts, and the work isn't exactly hard. Sometimes the guards trade a shift or double up if one has tickets to a concert or something." Brody grunted. "I'm betting Stuart is still on because he's concerned about you. He did say he'd buzz you when we come with the delivery. Does he usually?" "No, not with delivery people the security staff here knows, and they know most of them. They certainly know the staff of my favorite Chinese restaurant. It's the same one other residents use because it's closest and the food and service are great." "Well, it won't hurt to reassure him in person that you're looking as well as sounding better." Tasha accepted that assessment in the spirit in which she assumed it was intended and said merely, "Did you get any rest?" I doze now and then, cat naps. I can get by with them for quite a while. I bet, she murmured, moving toward the living area. She eyed a football game muted on her TV. You're a football fan? Not really. When she looked at him, he added, not really a sports fan of any kind. Tasha, I don't usually stay very long in one place, and even though some guardian assignments are more stationary than others, I still tend to move around a lot. I'd be hard-pressed to tell you which teams are playing right now, and I generally know even less about current TV shows and movies. I wonder how much of what most of us consider necessary for a full life seems trivial to him. Tasha went to curl up in the big chair and a half that was her favorite reading chair, and frowned at him for a moment before making a determined attempt to wear a more casual face. You really have given your life over to this. And I know why, but I can't say I know, not yet, and I don't think he'll ask if I got information about his wife and marriage out of his mind when we connected. I don't think he wants to know whether I can do that. He shrugged, keeping it light. Some people go through their entire lives with boring jobs and nothing that rouses them to fight. Nothing that really matters to them or seems to make a difference in the world. Wondering if they even have a purpose in life that counts for anything. And in case you're wondering, even though this wasn't something I planned, it is something I've committed to, completely. Because you couldn't save her. Yeah, I get that, she murmured. What I'm wondering about is the endgame. He sat down on the rounded arm of the sofa, which put him directly across from her. What do you mean? Well, you said it varies from psychic to psychic, the ways they find to protect themselves, that some go into hiding while others go into the spotlight, right? He nodded. And I'm sure some join up with you, your side in all this, and find a kind of protection among other psychics and those who understand them, as well as the use for their abilities, something useful, even important to devote their lives to. Brody hesitated, then nodded. A few have joined up along the way. We're honestly wary of that, especially with telepaths and clairvoyants, because we're fairly certain Duran is using psychics on his side, powerful ones, and quite a few of them. My guess is to gather intelligence as well as locate other psychics for him. Which means a psychic on this side, especially a telepath or a clairvoyant, could be an especially good source of information for them. Because one of us could pick up bits and pieces of intelligence we wouldn't ordinarily have access to, know more about the organization, even outside whatever cell we're a part of. It's possible. Tasha thought about that for a moment, but we tend to have shields. I don't know about new telepaths, but those of us born with it build our shields early or go nuts. And I'm guessing the born psychics outnumber those created, yes? Brody nodded slowly. As far as we've been able to tell, that's true. More psychics are born than created, and those born with abilities tend to have some kind of shield. Then it seems more logical that if one of his tactics to try to get whatever information he can through psychics, Duran would be using his telepaths to read those of you who don't have abilities, and so likely don't have shields, or to read newly created psychics who haven't learned to shield yet. That possibility has occurred to us. It's happened in the past. Maybe. We aren't completely certain. Brody shook his head suddenly. Well, some of us are certain. If you've been in this thing long enough, you see things you really can't explain. You have to theorize, draw inferences, whatever. Newly created psychics seem to be in the most danger for them, and at least some of us have wondered if it's because they simply haven't yet learned to protect their own minds. Duran and his kind have powerful psychics to do their bidding for whatever reason, and they want more. They need more. And born psychics give them more trouble. I believe they find it more difficult to control born psychics, at least most of them. Those are the ones they have to grab in the dead of night, leaving a burning house or wrecked car, or unrecognizable body behind to keep the cops from asking too many questions. Tasha thought about that, trying not to shiver. Born psychics and people working against them who aren't psychic at all. Those are the targets most likely to become the focus of one of his psychics. Definitely. He hesitated again, then said, over the years, we've evolved our techniques and procedures through experience. We discover something is needed, usually the hard way, and then we have that from then on. We don't usually discuss it, but guardians and soldiers, whoever's out in the field, always have backup nearby. Gifted psychics, some of the most gifted we have. They do their job and it's likely you'll never see them, but what they do is patrol the general area around us, as long as we're protecting a psychic, and reach out with their senses carefully. For the bad guys? More for other psychics working for them. The bad guys themselves are slippery because they're shadows.